back again for another monthly wrap up and another non-vlog style one. Things have been a little bit not filming friendly lately, but I do still want to tell you what I have been reading. I completed 9 things in the month of May, which is drastically different from April, which was my lowest month. I think this is probably the highest month that I've had so far this year. And really it's because a lot of the things that I finished, I had actually already started. I'm currently working on a project vlog where I am finishing all of the books that I have opened and just kind of left open. So that has been helping me to finish complete books this month. So I'm going to talk about the contemporary romance books that I finished this month first. So if you'd like to just hear about the fantasy sci-fi books, you can skip ahead to, I'll leave the timestamps down below. You can skip ahead if you don't want to hear about the contemporary romance books. The first one that I finished there was First Time Caller by B.K. Borison. This is a new release from this year, and it is the same author that has previously written the Love Light Farms contemporary romance series. I definitely do think that this one is being geared up to be another romance series, and that is one thing that I will say that I don't love about romance that are going to be part of a series, is that I feel like we spend more time than I would like not a lot of time, but more time than I would prefer hinting at potential future main characters. But overall, I think this book was just totally fine. My trend of this year of contemporary romance books just being okay is continuing. This is a single mom romance where our main character's 12-year-old daughter calls into a romance hotline to try to get dating advice for her mom, and the radio host is in fact our hero. I do think it was fine, but I will just say that having read all of Love Light Farms and now this next thing by B.K. Borison, I think that their writing is totally great, but I don't think that it's anything that I personally find particularly swoon-worthy. The only other thing there was that I never really felt like I was totally following our female lead, her journey of growth. It was a little bit chaotic. I don't know how to say chaotic. Maybe it wasn't clear, what was preventing her. She would have these, lofty dreams and visions, and then she'd be like, no, I'm expecting too much, and then she would have those dreams and visions again. And you're like, are we rooting for her to have her dreams and visions? I just felt like that progress, while probably very realistic and relatable for a lot of people, I didn't always totally follow the growth and the journey that we were on with her in particular. I also read Deep End by Ali Hazelwood, but I was not sure if I was originally going to read this because it is a college sports romance, neither of which are my thing. So I don't typically like to read college age romance books. I'm just not into the kinds of problems and the kinds of communication issues that we tend to have with that particular age range demographic. But I had been hearing good things and I was curious to check it out. And generally I have a good time with Ali Hazelwood, and I would say the same here. Overall, I had a totally fine time with it. But one of the things that I think I was most disappointed, I guess, was the BDSM exploration, which was supposed to be this book's whole thing. Ali Hazelwood does a little note at the beginning of the book that is what we're going to be exploring. Personally, I find that really exciting, not because it is my particular kink, but because I like kink. I like broad spectrum exploration of preferences on page in romance books, because I think it is really, really healthy as a society that we acknowledge and show that a variety of things people can be into, and that all of those things are totally okay and normal and great. But what I will say is that I think what was written on the page, what was actually included from a descriptive standpoint of what was happening, was very, very minimal, pretty dipping the toes into that proclivity. Whereas I do think that the characters were doing other things, it just wasn't shared. So that was maybe a little bit of a miss in terms of marketing and potentially the intent there, and at least what readers were led to believe was the intent of this book. Overall, I enjoyed the book, but it made me realize that I have a particular hang up with Ali Hazelwood's heroes. And it is not that they are all slight variations on each other. It is that her heroes never really have problems. Okay, let's excluding Not in Love, I guess, because that one was, she was a little bit more into mental health in that one. But excluding that one, all of the other heroes that this author writes tend to be men who have already figured out their shit. And why it bothers me is not that they have, done good things for their mental health and their, attachment, etc. It's that in our heroine's perspective, which is the only POV that we're getting, these men tend to become aspirational figures. They even seem like the expert in the relationship that is like guiding our main character, our female lead. And I just, whether or not we're getting the guy's perspective, I would actually, what did I just say? I would actually prefer it if he also had things that he needs to work on. Like if he too had problems of his own that he needed to work through, and that he wasn't just like this paramour of perfection that our main character is like oddly looking up to as having figured everything out. I don't like that disparity in the books. So I'm listing off all my critiques here, but overall it was a totally fine reading experience. I listened to Swept Away by Beth O'Leary, and this is a new release that came out this year that I have my eye on. I would say that I really liked parts of this book. It was kind of an interesting setup where our two characters have a one-night stand on a houseboat where there is some dispute about the ownership of the houseboat that is relevant, and there's a miscommunication about tying up the houseboat properly, and they wake up the next morning and they have drifted out into the North Sea. And it kind of becomes this like survival story of them like trying to figure out how to get to safety. It was more survival and the seriousness of what was going on there than I would have predicted. And it is an age gap romance where our female lead, our heroine, is older than our hero. I actually really enjoyed their the way that they communicated, like the interesting situation of being stranded and just having like endless time, and the way that led to their rapport and their ability to like trust and take care of each other. But I have been reading quite a few romances, it feels like lately. This is going to go for the next one that I'm going to talk about as well, where I feel like our main characters, particularly female main characters, are like really hung up on a best friend. Like, I don't mean like hung up romantically, they just like their best friend is like the perfect girl. And there's so much of the internal dialogue of our main characters that is talking and thinking about, well, my best friend would have done it this way. My best friend would have been so great at this particular situation because they're like this. And like, I just don't care. I don't know, like I've had main characters in books a lot lately who are just way too constantly comparing themselves to a best friend, or putting their best friends like first for everything. And I just like, I'm not gelling with that right now. On our heroes perspective, we have a hero who has been for the past year in therapy trying to work through some stuff that is making him kind of like see himself differently, making him make different choices, better choices. And so I really liked that representation, that like depiction on the page. So that was like overall was really, really great. I'm just not finding swoon worthy romances. That is my issue. Like, this was really, really great, but it wasn't swoon worthy. Finally, the last contemporary romance book that I read this month was a novel love story by Ashley Poston. Our main character finds herself. She is on a road trip to go to a holiday. In the middle of a rainstorm, her car starts to break down and she finds herself somehow in the town of her favorite contemporary romance series. And she is kind of trapped there because of her car and for other reasons. And she's like fangirling a little bit because she feels like she knows everybody and she gets to experience this town for herself. And she winds up meeting a guy there. And that is the whole dilemma. Again, I actually read a really good Goodreads review where it talked about how everything happened really suddenly in this book. Like, the romance suddenly comes out of nowhere. And the conflict suddenly comes out of nowhere. And the, what's that word? Reconciliation kind of suddenly comes out of nowhere. There was just really not that much about this book, about the romance in this book, that I was really, really into. However, outside of like the romance, everything else that is happening was actually like, felt like a love story for love stories, like, or a love story for contemporary romance books. But it's another book where our main character was like constantly talking and thinking about their best friend, this like perfect paramour, and how the best friend would do all of these other things. I don't particularly care for when a main character can only think about what their best friend would do in various situations. I find that really boring. So those were all of the contemporary romance books that I read this month. Now I'm going to talk about the fantasy books. And the first of which there is Faithbreaker by Hannah Kaner. This is one of my priority reads for 2025. It is a new release that I wanted to read. It just came out at the beginning of April, and it is the conclusion to the Fallen Gods trilogy that begins with the book Godkiller. I do really, really love this series at large, and I did really enjoy this book. I listened to the audiobook all the way throughout, and my one little asterisk there is that now that I know where the series goes and the extent to which politics winds up playing a role towards the latter half of the series, I would actually have preferred to read this, I think, with my eyes, or maybe rather just I wish that I had paid better attention to some of the things that were introduced in the first book, and I wish that maybe more time had been put towards some particular world elements and history elements in the first book, considering where we wound up with the story. I overall kind of enjoyed the arc that we went on with the story, and each book is actually kind of distinctive in the style, whereas this book is definitely a more of a military book than the first two previously were. Ultimately, I really enjoyed this book. I do think the first book is probably my favorite in the series, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It just is. It's not good. It's not bad. It just is. I'm having trouble not telling you all the things that I would like to say about this series, but I should just wait and talk to you about that in a different video. But overall in this book, I think like the relationships went, the romantic considerations went in a very different direction than I personally would have preferred, or at least I would have preferred to be warned maybe about the potential directions that they were going to go earlier on in the series. But ultimately, I really, really loved being with Kissin and Elo and Anara and Skidagath. I loved the personal growth journey that all of those characters had, each individually on page. And there were a couple small like additional POVs that we did get added in, but I never felt like they were detracting from the time that I was having with the characters that I loved from the very beginning. I will absolutely read more by Hannah Kaner. I would love to see where they are going to go next. This series, or this particular book in the series, as I said, was more military and war-based. It was more conflict-based. And overall, the series, I thought, did a very broad spectrum and discussion, if not necessarily analysis, but I think it had a very broad spectrum, very diverse approach to faith, which was something that I personally really, really appreciate. There was no, I think how I read it and how I finished off, there was no aggressively forceful, this is what you should think about faith. I feel like it was actually pretty open, but I could be, placing my own beliefs on my interpretation of how I finished off with reading that book. But if you have also finished this series, I would love to hear what you thought about like the overall discussion about faith. I think that I am pretty biased, and I liked that this felt unbiased, but maybe it was my bias, and so I was being reaffirmed in my beliefs. Let me know. I'm really curious to hear how you thought of the faith topic with this series overall. Then I finished Emily Wilde's Compendium of Lost Tales, and this one is the conclusion, another new release for 2025, another conclusion to a trilogy, the Emily Wilde trilogy. And I was actually a little bit disappointed in this book, but I think that I just didn't really have that many expectations whatsoever. So I'm not like profoundly disappointed by any means. I just kind of felt like as I was reading this book, whereas the first two, when I read them, I was really enjoyed. I found them quite delightful. They weren't new favorites necessarily, but they were really, really nice, delightful little escapes. And in this one, I just kind of felt like, actually, I'm kind of over this. So I felt like it was a good place to end the series. I'm glad that it didn't drag on, at least for me personally, because I felt like actually, this is enough. This is enough with this particular setup and dynamic and the, you know, the uniqueness that this series did bring. I felt like, actually, I'm pretty good with where we left off. So it is our world, but in an alternate history where there are fae, and our main character Emily studies them, and we're reading her field journals, and she winds up getting drawn in with an academic rival of hers, Wendell Bambleby, in the first book. And Wendell Bambleby also has a problem, and as the series evolves, we just get really, really into Wendell Bambleby's problem. And while there was still all of Emily's, you know, stuff, and I liked generally the dynamic between Emily and Wendell, I was a little bit disappointed that we went so far into Wendell's situation. I don't have strong feelings overall about this conclusion to the trilogy. I think the first one was great. I particularly loved the second one in that series. The second one wound up being my favorite. I know this is a beloved series by a lot of people, so I'm really, really curious to see how the ending hit for people who have stronger feelings about it than I do. I finished The Memory Hunters by Mia Tsai. This is a new release that is going to be coming out in July. I got an e-arc from NetGalley and from the publishers here. Mia Tsai is the author of Bitter Medicine, which is a book that I rave about here all the time as being super underhyped. Memory Hunters is completely different, and I think that that is really important to know, and I hope that it is coming through in the marketing. Bitter Medicine is a little bit of like a fantasy romance, sort of like a urban contemporary fantasy romance, whereas Memory Hunters, there is a situation involving romance, but it is not about the romance. I think that if you read the synopsis and you're thinking, Mia Tsai, Bitter Medicine, can't wait to see what they do next, I think you could read into the way that the synopsis is reading in terms of like a bodyguard situation, and I think you should not read into that. So if you like generational trauma, if you like exploration of memory and cultural history and who owns history and the propagation, the protection, the access to history, if those are words that you're like, ooh, yes, museums, good or bad, like, then you should check out this book. But if you're not into that thematic content, I don't necessarily think this book is going to be for you. I didn't say what this is about. We're following a memory hunter. In this world, certain people can basically take shrooms. People can take these mushrooms, and depending on like what they're holding or where they are or where the mushroom like grew, they can dive deep into the memories of that space, place, etc., of their ancestors to find out information about history. It is a world in which there was an extremely long period of storms. I think like read natural disasters, where a lot of technology and history seems to have been lost, and our main character dives down and gets a memory about their particular religion that could shake things up. So again, I think that if you're interested in the thematic content that this one explores, again, think like museums, good or bad, whose role is, who owns history, who should be protecting history, who has the right and who should be controlling the access to history, generational trauma, memory, ancestors. If you are digging that concept, then you should check out this book. If you read the synopsis and thought, ooh, bodyguard romance. No. I forgot to say that Memory Hunters was another priority read for 2025. It was a new release for 2025 that I wanted to read. Then I finished The Endless War by Daniel L. Jensen, another priority read for 2025, and one where I originally read it up to like the 85% and then had it taken away from the library because that perpetually happens to me because I don't always read things in time. I'm human. But I was able to finally get another copy of this and finish the last 15%. So I am continuing on. This one was one of the sequels that I wanted to read for this year. And this is set in the Bridge Kingdom world. It is the conclusion to the second couple's arc. So this is a fantasy romance series where it is like a collection of duologies where each couple gets a duology and the world plot is overarching. So this was the second couple and the fourth book overall. 2 more books to go with a new couple. This was not the couple for me. I didn't really like either of them as people, and that was a bit of a deterrent. I also discovered when Bridge Kingdom was originally written, I have listened to interviews with Danielle L. Jensen, and when she originally wrote the Bridge Kingdom and the first duology, including the Traitor Queen, less physically descriptive spice was more common, compared to now, where there is sometimes the expectation to have things a little bit steamier. And what I've discovered, even though I felt like when I was reading the Bridge Kingdom, I was like, I could take a little more spice here. When I read then later on more books by her, I've actually discovered that the way that she writes intimacy scenes is not my personal preference. Alas, I am going to continue on in the series. I will be reading the next couple. I have heard good things. It maybe has a trope that I'm not in love with, but I am hopeful. I still would really like to finish the overall world here, and part of me wants to reread the Bridge Kingdom just to like relive that love from those first 2 books. But part of me is also afraid that I will ruin what I think about it if I read it back. I don't know. Maybe it was just like the perfect book at the perfect time, and I shouldn't shake that up. I don't know. Last thing then that I finished in May was The Rebel Witch. I don't remember actually if there's a "the" in there, by Kristen Ciccarelli, the conclusion to the Heartless Hunter or the Crimson Moth duology. Super excited. I'm just like completing things. I'm completing series. I'm completing duologies. I'm checking off priorities. May was good. Heartless Hunter totally surprised me. If you want to hear my full in-depth thoughts about Heartless Hunter, a young adult fantasy romance book, you should check out my Romantasy, reading Romantasy books that I feel skeptical about vlog that I did a couple months ago. I will link it up above and down below, so you can check that out if you like, because I was totally surprised by that one. I definitely thought that I was not going to enjoy it because I have not really been enjoying young adult. And I thought this was great. I think this is a really great young adult fantasy romance series. I am fairly critical of both fantasy romance and young adult fantasy at this stage in my reading life. I find myself to be quite critical of those 2 things, and I thought this rocked. If I read this in my late teens, early 20s, I would have been obsessed. There was more on-page chemistry than I was expecting, again, considering where we left off. The one thing that I will say is that one character has a bit of a change of heart, change of mind, change of overall perception of the situation, and it doesn't really happen on page enough for my personal preference. I feel like the character is kind of thinking something over here, and then suddenly they start doing actions that check out over here, and I would have liked to read them working through that a little bit better, but I feel like it was done the way that it was done so that some things are more of a surprise, but I would have liked to seen some of the steps on the way of how they got there with their thought process. Not because I don't understand it, but because I would have appreciated some internal acknowledgement of that transition period. That's all. The other thing is that I feel like the ending, I don't want to say cop-out, but I feel like the ending was way too fast, in that there was no falling action whatsoever, and then we just jump ahead to an epilogue to be everything's fine. And I've had actually that in a couple books recently. I also felt that there was no falling action discussed in the conclusion to the Burning Blade and Silver Eye series, where we just got an epilogue to be this is what it is like now, but with no falling action, and then just to jump ahead to an epilogue when the world has been sorted out. And this is a pretty messy transition. It would have been a messy transition politically. So if it was an adult book, I guess you would maybe expect more of that falling action transition period. I feel like you can get away with it because it is young adult, but there's no falling action. It just jumps to an epilogue. Okay, there we have it. That is my May. Let me see here. 3 priority reads finished, which is good because I didn't finish any in April, so I am not quite caught up. I have until the end of June to catch up my priority reads for Q2, so that means that I still have to read 3 priority reads this month in June as well, in order to allow myself to stay on track. And if I am on track at the end of Q3, then I can buy a book. So it might happen, it might not. I'm in the middle of one, but I don't have the other 2 picked out realistically. So, but there you have it. I am super happy with my May overall, not because it was a big number, but because it was completing a lot of things that I have on the go, not only books that I had open, but also series that I had open. So it just felt like really, really good to actually be like checking things off. Whether or not the reading experience itself overall was as positive as I would have liked, I think there's some gems in here, but I do think it's nice to clear out the things that I did have open in order to like make room for things that I would really, really hope to enjoy more. There we have it for May. Let me know how your May was, and I will see you guys next time. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.